This is going to be my favorite part of the whole thing, drifting. If you don't know how to drift on an adventure bike, you are missing a lot of the fun. Learning to drift, really important that you find somewhere to practice it, to learn it with smooth, consistent traction. You don't want a whole bunch of changes in your traction, you know, slippery bits, grippy bits, rocks stuck into the ground, that sort of thing. That's going to change the angle of the bike all the time, make it really hard to learn to drift. So we've come here to Muriwai Beach. That's where I learned to do it. And the really cool thing here, we've got super consistent, smooth traction. It's the perfect environment. Loads of runoff, it doesn't matter if I blow wide. And the cool thing is here in New Zealand, this is actually a legal road. So whilst we're probably not supposed to be doing drifts on it, we are actually allowed to be here on a motorbike, which is very, very cool. So there's two sides to drifting. There's learning to drift into the corner under brakes and learning to drift out of the corner on the power, acceleration drift. So we're going to start practicing doing the drifting in to start off with. And then once we've got that nailed, we'll play around with the sliding, power sliding out of the turn. The drifting in is a really good thing to practice, even if you're not interested in doing great big skids, because this is the technique I'll use when I'm coming into a gravel corner too fast. If I've misread the road, if I've, coming in too hot, this will allow me to brake whilst entering the turn and setting the bike up to turn. So even right the way up to the apex of the corner, I'm hard on the brakes and trying to scrub that speed off. So it's kind of my panic move, my get out of jail for free move if I come into a gravel corner too fast. So it's good to play around with that technique before you need it. So we do have to talk about safety here. The problem with learning to drift is you can't drift slowly. You have to be going pretty fast to do it. So therefore the risk is escalated. The most common injury we get with this, we call it backwards foot syndrome. So it's when guys slide out and they don't lift their foot off the foot peg, the bike comes down, traps the bike and the foot into the ground, your toes dig in and it turns your foot round backwards. It's really, really sketchy. It's really dangerous. So if you do start to lose control, if you feel the bike starting to slide out from underneath you, your reflex reaction needs to be to lift your inside leg and get it the heck out of the way. If you do that, you're not going to get pinched in, much less likely to be injured. And again, try and find a sort of situation with nice terrain that allows you to practice this with a bit of confidence. If you do throw it away, it's not going to be the end of the world. So we're going to start off with learning to drift into the turns. So the important thing to remember here is you have to be braking quite aggressively for this technique to work. If you're not braking hard, the weight's not going to transfer forwards enough, the back tire's not going to get light enough, and it's not going to want to slide out. So you do have to be going pretty quick for doing this, like at least sort of 50 kilometers an hour sort of thing to start off with. The mistake a lot of guys make is they pull the clutch in and stomp on the back brake really aggressively. That makes the back end of the bike step out really quickly and be very, very hard to control. So the thing to remember here all the way through is that your bike goes sideways when your wheel speed and your ground speed is different, either through braking or through acceleration. The greater the difference between the ground speed and the wheel speed, the quicker, the faster your bike's going to go sideways. So for braking, sliding in under brakes, we want to gently ease the back end of the bike out nice and slowly so we're in control and we've got the sort of drift angle that we want, rather than pulling the clutch in, stomping on the back brake and having it snap out. So I do this whole thing without touching my clutch. I have the advantage on the KTM of having the slipper clutch. Most bikes have slipper clutches now, most of the modern adventure bikes. If you don't have a slipper clutch on your bike, you might have to just gently pull the clutch lever a little bit to reduce that engine braking, reduce the chatter, but it's not a full disengagement of the clutch. If you've got a slipper clutch, leave the clutch completely alone. Okay, so we're on the gas, and we want to set up the turn, start the drift. So my hips come back into my braking position, my front brake comes on and my back brake comes on at the same time. So the front brake is to slow you down, the back brake is to start decelerating the rear wheel, to start braking that traction and letting the back end come out. It's not a great big stomp like we talked about, it's just dragging that back brake, aiming to slow the wheel, not stop it. At that same time, my hips come out in the exact same way we go through the standing cornering technique, so the basic standing cornering technique. My hips are coming out, my head's coming out over the tire, but this time I'm using quite a bit of counter steer. So I'm leaning on the inside handlebar, turning into the slide, and then the feeling I have in my head is I'm basically pushing the back end of the bike out using my inside handlebar. So it kind of feels like I'm doing that. I really want the bike leant over, leant down into it. That gets a bit of the tire off the ground, makes it easier to slide. But really importantly, if there is a change in my traction, if the traction increases, if I've got the bike leant right down and the traction increases, it's gonna stand the bike up a little bit, but I'll still be in control. If you lean the bike over nice and far like this, and there's an increase in traction, the bike's gonna stand up a bit, but you're still gonna have control. If the bike's too straight up and down, so kind of like this, when you get that increase in traction, it's gonna stand the bike up excessively, and you're risking a high side. Give me 5, 10 low sides to 1 high side any day. So we talked about it just before. Your bike's gonna go sideways when your ground speed and your wheel speed are different. The greater the difference, the more it goes sideways. So whilst you're doing that, if the bike goes too sideways, to regain control, you need your ground speed and your wheel speed to match as quickly as you can. So we're doing that by grabbing that clutch, disengaging the drive, and letting go of the back brake. That way your ground speed and your wheel speed, the wheel's gonna catch up really quickly, ground speed and wheel speed are gonna match, and that's the quickest way to fix the problem. Clutch comes in, let the brake off, let that ground speed and wheel speed match, happy times. So I'm gonna start off with practicing the brake slide of it. This is the real fun stuff. So once you're familiar with getting that slide into the turns, that feeling of drifting into the turns, you've got that control consistently, we can start playing around with drifting due to acceleration on the way out. So the key here, the safety thing here, is to make sure that your ground speed and your wheel speed never really match. Or when they do match, it's for the smallest amount of time possible. So your bike's either sideways due to braking or sideways due to accelerating. No big dead zone in the middle. That dead zone when you're not doing anything is when your traction's gonna return, the bike's gonna wanna stand up, the slide's gonna stop, and you're gonna start to drift wide in your turn. So the idea is it's either braking or bang, straight on that power, accelerating. As you're accelerating out, your hips are to the outside, your weight's on the outside peg, your head's out over the tire, all that stuff that we learned in the basic standing cornering technique. You're turning your head, looking through the corner, and you're playing with your throttle to control that drift angle. The more throttle you use, the more sideways the bike's gonna go because of the greater difference between wheel speed and ground speed. The less throttle you use, the more the slide will come in. So it's playing with that power, playing with that angle of the drift. Again, really importantly, if it starts to let go, if you've got too much, that ground speed and that wheel speed needs to match straight away. You do that by grabbing the clutch. Why that works better than shutting the throttle? When you shut the throttle, it takes a while for the engine to wind down, so the slide keeps going longer. And also, if you've got a lot of engine braking, like say on an old, like a 990, it's possible that the bike will go from an acceleration slide into a deceleration slide, into a compression slide, and the back end's gonna keep going. The quickest way to fix the problem is just to grab that clutch. Some people at this point go, yeah, wouldn't that result in the high side? To be honest, I don't think it does. If there's that small amount of traction that the bike's letting go, there's probably not enough traction there to actually cause the high side anyway. My go-to in this situation is just to grab that clutch. The whole time I'm doing this, I've got my finger on the clutch ready to pull that trigger as soon as there's anything I don't like the look of. A common mistake with this, or a common problem with this, is not knowing when to transition from that brake slide into that power slide. And a lot of time people are waiting for this like really clear signal of when to do it, or a really good feeling of when to do it, and it almost never comes. You're gonna have way more control, way more balance on the bike once the bike's drifting under acceleration. So rather than kind of waiting for that clear, awesome signal, you kind of just have to create it yourself. So you're going, oh, I'm not sure if it's right, screw it, do it anyway. Oh, yeah, cool, now it feels good. So generally it's sort of just before the apex of the turn, but you know, somewhere in around there, it's kind of a rough science. So the other thing that can help with learning this drifting techniques is to use your rider aids. So off-road ABS will allow you complete control of the rear wheel and allow you good aggressive braking of the front, but it's gonna intervene before you slide the front out. So that's gonna help you out when you learn to play around with this. You know, you've got that ability to slide the rear, but it's going to stop you anything too silly happening with the front. Likewise with off-road traction control. So off-road traction control on the KTMs will allow the rear wheel to go around twice to the front wheel going around once. That's going to be enough to get a nice, easy, controlled drift out of the corner. But it's going to stop anything too excessive happening and give you, another tool to help sort of lower the pressure when you're learning to play around like this. So in my excitement to start doing skids on the beach, I forgot to tell you guys an important bit of information. So you're on the gas, sliding out of the corner. If you're starting to drift too wide, you need to tighten your line. The way I do that is I grab my clutch and I stomp on my back brake to snap the back end of the bike out momentarily, and then I get back in the gas again to continue to slide. That allows me to tighten my line mid-corner so I can not drift too wide into the ditch or onto the wrong side of the road. Not that I would ever drift on a public road or anything, but to tighten that line mid-corner, it's a quick slip of the clutch, stab of the back brake, step it out even more, get back into it again. So the key points, number one, make sure you watch the standing cornering video that we did earlier. All the techniques involved there are the same for doing this drifting. You're moving with your tires, centered over your tires, not letting the tires slide out from underneath you. The important thing to remember as well, you can't drift at low speed. You've got to be going reasonably quick to do this to get the sort of forces involved that you need. Important thing to remember, bikes go sideways when the difference between ground speed and wheel speed. The greater the difference, the greater the sideways. So if you want the slide to stop, pull that clutch in, get your wheel speed and your ground speed to match, slide will come right, happy times. Find yourself a really smooth, consistent place to practice with just the right amount of traction. And the other thing is, this is really, really, really good fun. Make sure you do it.